Shakuras teams with Amon's Zerg broods. We hold only the southwest quadrant of Telemetros, and even that is in peril.
Hi, I'm Rob Zacny, and I'm working on my StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void review for IGN. And right now we're just sort of diving into an early campaign mission in the Protoss campaign. Legacy of the Void represents sort of the final installment for StarCraft 2, and, you know, for the foreseeable future, probably the end of the StarCraft saga. And as you might expect, it is focused on the Protoss race, which are sort of backhandedly called the Space Elves of StarCraft, which is a pretty apt comparison. But what's kind of cool about Legacy of the Void is that this campaign really does make the Protoss sort of stand out now in terms of the way they feel. You know, in the past, while the cutscenes and fiction told you certain things about the Protoss, they all had a neural link, that they were kind of this ancient race, that they had to make up in quality what they lacked in numbers. By and large, it didn't necessarily feel like the Protoss were all that different than the other races. You didn't necessarily feel that this was this ancient race kind of on their last legs. The Legacy of the Void campaign really addresses that, and it's been kind of surprising, because this is a campaign where I've realized that until I played it, I didn't really know the Protoss at all. So when the campaign opens with, you know, kind of a triumphant moment as the Protoss begin to reclaim their lost homeworld, which was taken from them at the end of the original StarCraft game. But of course, it all blows up spectacularly in their faces, and you know, here early in the campaign, the High Templar Artanis is aboard sort of the last great Protoss warship, the Spear of Adun, and kind of fleeing for his life as the Protoss try to rally in the wake of this disaster. You know, the Spear of Adun is not just sort of, you know, every game has had sort of a center stage for the campaign. So Jim Raynor's Hyperion was sort of where he lived through the Wings of Liberty campaign. That's where a lot of the characters hung out. Kerrigan sort of hung out with her Zerg buddies, and so here Artanis has the Spear of Adun, and you know, in between missions you can go to the Protoss War Council, where you basically choose between different flavors of your classic Protoss units, and by and large you're choosing between sort of the Templar model of unit, which is kind of the more basic stand up and fight type version of the unit, or the sort of the Dark Templar version of the unit, which is a little sneakier, a little more magical, a little more damage, and maybe a little less tanky. But along the way, the Protoss are also sort of trying to confront a really, I have to admit, stereotypically ancient evil. There's this ancient demigod named Amon who has come back in this game, and he's sort of been in the background of all the StarCraft games. He is what they would call the big bad of the StarCraft universe. But now we're finally confronting him, and I will admit he's maybe not the most interesting adversary. It's pretty conventional stuff, but what makes Legacy of the Void succeed is the fact that it does make the Protoss feel like you know, they're really struggling to keep this fight going. So, you know, early in the campaign, they basically had to give up a lot of their psychic connections just to avoid being corrupted by Amon. Some major characters have already bitten the dust, and now they've got one ship and one army left, and with it, you know, it's kind of on them to save the galaxy. And so you dive into these missions, and you know, I have to say the missions in Legacy of the Void, I'm not that far in the campaign, but even at this early stage, they address a lot of the issues I eventually had with the Heart of the Swarm campaign. In Legacy of the Void, the missions are, you know, kind of all about making do with really limited resources. It really ties into that theme of the Protoss being on their last legs. Whereas in Heart of the Swarm, one issue I eventually had with it is that first, Kerrigan herself could be a ridiculous hero unit who kind of unbalanced the mission design, by herself. But also a lot of these missions were all about sort of feeling the power, the unstoppable power of the Zerg Swarm, which was kind of cool, but it also made the missions feel a bit samey. That, in one mission after another, Kerrigan would sort of show up, and kick a whole lot of butt, and then you move on to the next mission. Here, really, you kind of have to think about how you're going to achieve your mission goals with really limited resources and under constant attack. The Legacy of the Void campaign has this feeling of constantly being under siege. You never really have the resources to both go on the attack and complete your mission objectives, but then also secure your main base. And the way the missions are designed, you're constantly having to sort of face these really aggressive counterattacks. In an early mission, every time you achieve one of your objectives, Eamon launches an even worse counterattack at you, and so you have this feeling that like even the world itself has sort of turned against you. Your units are out there on the map, and then suddenly enemies are sort of erupting from the ground, and you're awash in enemy reinforcements and fighting for your life. So it ends up making this campaign a lot more interesting than Heart of the Swarm, and probably the strongest StarCraft campaign we've had since Wings of Liberty, which is kind of your quintessentially like excellent RTS campaign. So hopefully Legacy of the Void can keep up that strength. But obviously, you can't really talk about StarCraft without sort of addressing the multiplayer, and so how is this balance between the three factions changed with Legacy of the Void? And it must be admitted they've made some pretty radical changes, in this outing for StarCraft. So one major change right off the bat is that Legacy of the Void sort of has an accelerated start. So when a multiplayer mission begins, when a multiplayer battle begins, you have a lot more workers, and you sort of skip a lot of sort of the classic opening phases of a StarCraft match and get right to the big choices about what kind of build you're using, what kind of army you're going to employ against the enemy, what timings you're going to be looking for in terms of attacks. That's probably going to be controversial, but I have to admit that as someone who never really had the patience to develop a great opening game, and also got pretty sick of playing the same 5 minutes of StarCraft at the start of every match, I find these changes pretty welcome. I'm pretty happy sort of, cutting to the chase, as it were. The other issue is that the mineral patches themselves in Legacy of the Void are a little bit less well-stocked. So Legacy of the Void, you're constantly sort of trying to stay one step ahead of your rapidly depleting funds, which means that you have to go out on these maps and start claiming bases, because if you sort of sit back and try to turtle up for too long, you'll run out of money fairly quickly. So obviously every army gets some new units in this game. Since I primarily play Terran, that's what I've been focusing on for now, and that's what we're looking at right now. Is I'm just sort of messing around with an easy AI. I'm really happy with some of the changes I've already seen with Terran. One of the things that always sort of bothered me in previous editions of StarCraft is that Terran play sort of divides along these two sorts of compositions, bio or mech. Bio being an army comprised predominantly of infantry, biological units. A mech army was predominantly composed of tanks and Hellions and other vehicles. The issue I always had there was that mech armies were really slow, and they weren't a lot of fun. They were efficient. It was a very powerful way to play. If you got good at mech, you could be a real force to be reckoned with. But even when it went well, it was one of those strategies that just wasn't terribly enjoyable. Sort of new school Legacy of the Void Terran, certainly, at first glance, feels like they have a lot more options. Some of the new units, including my favorite probably in this entire game, the Terran Liberator, which is sort of this mobile gunship that has sort of an area effect anti-air attack, but then also can sort of deploy into gunship mode and you start firing at ground targets. in a certain area. It ends up making things like having a Terran aerial armada suddenly a lot more viable than ever before. You can do new sorts of harassment. You can, take new sorts of defensive positions, hiding behind these walls of liberator fire, so that nobody can even get at your units. It's a really powerful unit, and it opens up a lot of possibilities, and that's kind of a thread that runs through a lot of the changes I've seen in this game. The other issue is that the Terrans have a lot more options for mech play, including a really cool sort of harassment unit called the Cyclone, which, if you get them in sufficient numbers, can sort of turn Terran mech play into it's still the efficient tanky Terran mech you've always known, but it just happens to unfold a lot faster. It's a lot more energetic and exciting to play and watch. So at first glance, at least, I have to say that I feel like where Heart of the Swarm tended to slow StarCraft down and make it kind of into a game of endurance, Legacy of the Void really picks up the pace in a lot of key ways, and so far, at least, it feels like a lot more dynamic and enjoyable game. But obviously, all of that comes with caveats. I've just really scratched the surface of StarCraft so far. There's co-op missions I haven't had a chance to put too much time into. There's also Archon mode, in which you and a friend sort of share control of a side in a multiplayer match, which is fun, but I'm not certain yet what its staying power is going to be over the long haul. So there's a lot of questions I still have about Legacy of the Void. In terms of the campaign, I'm already pretty confident that I'm happy where this is going. And I think if you're into StarCraft for the campaign and you want to see sort of how the saga ends, nothing I've seen has given me any pause about the quality of the single player. So I would say have at it if you're eager to get at it and not get spoiled. But if you're someone who's really hoping that this is going to reinvent StarCraft multiplayer, or maybe make it a little more accessible to more casual players, the jury's still out, and that's something I'm definitely going to be looking at, over the course of the next week, because certainly I'm in that boat too. This is a game I always sort of admired from afar, and I've wanted to get good at, but at the same time, it's a game that could often, discourage you, and it required a really enormous upfront investment and solitary investment to really enjoy. So, over the next week, I'm going to be spending a lot more time on multiplayer and the various cooperative modes, and sort of seeing whether or not Legacy of the Void can sort of restore the magic that, over the course of Heart of the Swarm, seemed to sort of slip out of the StarCraft world. As a StarCraft fan myself, I certainly hope so, but I vividly remember that, in the first week that Heart of the Swarm came out, I was really confident that Blizzard had completely nailed it and had done everything right. And, within a month or two of the game coming out, I had basically stopped playing and never really went back. So hopefully Legacy of the Void can finish on a stronger note. But, time will tell, and I'll be back next week with my final review of StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void. For all your StarCraft news, stick here with IGN.